We're going to begin our show this morning with a major escalation in President Trump's efforts to prosecute his political opponents with the indictment of former FBI Director James Comey by a federal grand jury. Now, this comes just days after the president publicly pressured his attorney general, Pam Bondi, to do just that. Comey's being charged with 2 counts, making a false statement and obstruction of a congressional proceeding. It's the first time in U.S. history that an ex-director of the FBI has been indicted. The charges relate to testimony Comey gave. This was back in 2020, and it was during a Senate Judiciary Committee. Comey, who denies any wrongdoing, reacted to the news. He posted a video on Instagram yesterday. We're going to show you a little bit of this. He appeared defiant and declaring his innocence. In a few moments, we're going to speak with NBC News legal analyst Danny Savalas about all this. But before this, let's get the latest from NBC News Washington correspondent Alice Barr. Alice, good morning.
Good morning, Savannah. President Trump's known animosity toward Comey dates back to his having approved the Russia investigation from the first Trump campaign. On Capitol Hill, Democrats are accusing the president of abusing the power of the Justice Department, while Republican allies applaud the move.
Incidences of obstruction of justice.
This morning, a former director of the FBI waking up as a felony defendant. James Comey now indicted by a grand jury on charges of making a false statement and obstruction of a congressional proceeding. It is a major escalation against someone President Trump sees as a political enemy.
My family and I have known for years that there are costs to standing up to Donald Trump.
Comey posting this video overnight.
And I'm innocent, so let's have a trial.
As the president celebrated the news with the words "Justice in America." The charges stem from congressional testimony Comey gave in September 2020 when he was pressed over whether he lied to Congress years earlier about authorizing a leak to the press involving investigations into Donald Trump and Hillary Clinton.
I stand by what the testimony you summarized.
The statute of limitations for the charges was set to run out next week. On Saturday, President Trump publicly pressed Attorney General Pam Bondi to take action against Comey and other perceived political opponents who've investigated him. Yesterday, before the indictment, saying this.
I think I'd be allowed to get involved if I want, but I don't really choose to do so. I can only say that Comey's a bad person.
The top prosecutor tasked with leading the Comey investigation resigned last week rather than seeking an indictment, while a senior DOJ official tells NBC News career prosecutors laid out why they believe there was not enough evidence to charge in a memo to President Trump's hand-picked replacement and former personal attorney Lindsay Halligan, who has no experience as a prosecutor and is now the only one to sign Comey's charging papers.
And Comey is now ordered to appear in court in just under 2 weeks, as Attorney General Pam Bondi said the Justice Department will follow the facts in this case. Savannah.
All right. Alice, thank you so much. Well, for more on this, let's bring in our legal analyst, Danny Savalas. Danny, good morning. So sometimes, like grand jury, this can get super wonky. I think like a really good way to put it, though, as you've explained to me, I've learned this from you, it's just when something's going to a grand jury, it's kind of like the evidence is super duper sound. Like it is really there. That's why they're taking this step. And we actually just saw something kind of extraordinary happen, which was this top prosecutor that had been leading the investigation chose to resign instead of an indictment. And now we're seeing an indictment with the next one in line. What does that tell you?
DOJ's internal policy is don't go to the grand jury unless you think you can prove your case to the highest standard in our law beyond a reasonable doubt, the criminal standard. However, once you get to the grand jury, you only need to demonstrate by a preponderance of the evidence. That's all you need to get an indictment. You add to that the fact that a grand jury proceeding is a completely one-sided affair. There are no defense attorneys. There is no defendant. It is just the prosecutor. And in this case, reportedly, it is literally just the prosecutor, just the U.S. attorney who had been on the job for a matter of days, presenting by herself with no prosecution experience. I wish I could have been a fly on the wall because as a defense attorney, I've probably read hundreds of grand jury transcripts, but I've never presented to a grand jury. And I would be anxious about it because First, for me, this is someone who has no, as I understand it, no criminal defense or prosecution experience whatsoever.
Wow.
Presenting to a grand jury, which is a difficult process. It's not something that you just walk into and do for the first time on a case of this magnitude.
Right, absolutely. It also looks like the grand jury was kind of divided here. The charging paper showed that jurors refused to indict Comey on one of that prosecution's proposed charges. What does that tell you about this case?
It's very telling. It shows me that even in that one-sided affair, the prosecution could not get the indictment. I guess I should be precise. The U.S. attorney who pushed this through couldn't get all of the charges that she wanted in this one-sided affair. So I think that's very telling. But guess what? That's really only a conclusion that's maybe philosophical, maybe moral. The bottom line is, now that he's indicted, those charges are going forward one way or another.
We got that snippet of sort of his mindset when he posted this Instagram video being sort of defiant, saying, let's go to trial. How do you think he approaches this, and what does happen next year?
A couple things. First, you attack the actual elements of the crime. Section 1001 requires false statements, but it's more than that. They have to be material, they have to be knowing, and they have to be false. A lot of people are talking about a motion because of vindictive or really selective prosecution. Here's the thing about those motions. All federal prosecution is selective. They are of limited jurisdiction. So by their very nature, they pick and choose the prosecutions that they want to take. They couldn't possibly prosecute everything that's illegal under federal criminal law. So everything about federal prosecution is a kind of cherry picking. That being said, this may be the greatest case in American history for selective prosecution. If a judge is going to decide that this was politically motivated and not based on the underlying facts, this might be that case. But I still caution, those motions, incredibly difficult to win.
So there's been this conversation around Pam Bondi's involvement, and really it's because we had basically like a Dear Pam message that the president posted on Truth Social. So it really wasn't a secret. I mean, he posted what he would like to see her do, which was go after people that he had seen as doing something wrong. Is there any way that that could be something that Comey is able to like introduce here and bring up as a grand jury trial unfolds that says, look at what the president had asked our attorney general to do that could help him in some way, that say, hey, you even had a prosecutor resign over this. Doesn't seem like there was a there.
Yes and no. The best place to make that argument is pre-trial in a motion to dismiss, alleging that the prosecution is selective and therefore unconstitutional, unjust. To the extent that what you just talked about reveals facts that tend to point to Comey's innocence or that he's not guilty, those may be relevant. So, for example, tending to show that the investigation was really motivated by this sort of tweet or this direction by the president, that could be helpful. But look for the government to make motions to preclude that kind of evidence, because what went into the prosecutorial decision, they'll argue, has nothing to do with the underlying guilt as long as the grand jury indicted.
All right, Danny Savalas, thank you so much. Well, President Trump has announced a new round of tariffs, citing concerns over imports that he says are hurting local manufacturers. They include imported drugs like pharmaceuticals, all that kind of stuff that we take, as well as home items, think kitchen cabinets, upholstered furniture. NBC News White House correspondent Yamiche Alcindor joins us now with more on this, other developments here. Yamiche, good morning. So these new tariffs announced by President Trump yesterday, they would go into effect next week. I mean, some steep numbers here. Walk us through these announced tariffs and why these specific things are what the president is targeting in this round.
Well, good morning, Savannah. The president really touted what he sees as a successful strategy when it comes to tariffs by his administration. And as a result, he's rolling out even more tariffs that he says is going to make America more money, though experts are worried that it might increase consumer prices. I want to, as you say, walk you through some of these tariffs. We could put it up for post. He posted that he will be imposing a 100% tariff on branded products or patented pharmaceutical products. He also said he was going to be imposing a 50% tariff on all kitchen cabinets, bathroom vanities, and other associated products starting October 1st. And he also said 30% tariff on upholstered furniture. And then he said a 25% tariff on all heavy trucks made in other parts of the world. So the president there laying out a number of new tariffs that are going to be going into effect soon. The president also saying that he wants to use part of the proceeds he's getting from these tariffs to help farmers, especially in particular soybean farmers who are now losing because we used to export a number of soybeans to China. It was a huge export. Now China is buying that from Argentina, and U.S. farmers are really in a bind here, Savannah.
Yamiche, also let's talk about some news from earlier in the day. President Trump had signed this memo directing his Attorney General Pam Bondi to seek jurisdiction for crimes committed in Washington, D.C. that allow the death penalty under federal law. It's something that Mr. Trump has actually looked into previously. What is driving this decision, and where do we see this going?
Well, the president continues to tout the idea that he believes this federal takeover that we've seen happen in Washington, D.C., with the National Guard patrolling and other military officials patrolling the streets of Washington, D.C., that it's been successful because crime has dropped. Critics of this say, well, if you send in the National Guard, yeah, crime is going to drop. But then when they leave, the crime issues are still going to be there. That being said, the president is very clear that he wants to sort of up the ante here when it comes to the death penalty. Take a listen to what the president said.
This is the death penalty for somebody that kills people in Washington, D.C. I think it's capital. It's a very interesting capital punishment, capital city. Right? It's capital. But this is our capital city. We can't allow that to happen. People come in from Iowa to look at the Lincoln Memorial and they end up getting killed. It doesn't happen anymore. It's not going to happen. And if it does happen, it's the death penalty for the person that did it.
So there you have it, the president really wanting to step up efforts to take even more federal control of what's going on in Washington, D.C., Savannah.
Also, I do want to ask you about President Trump's border czar, Tom Homan. There's been this back and forth this week, an accusation of him accepting $50,000 in cash from undercover FBI agents. Homan denies the allegations. An investigation has been closed. Tell us where we're at with that and what Senate Democrats want to do here.
Yeah, so Tom Homan is continuing to deny that he broke the law in any way. But Senate Democrats are now demanding both the DOJ and the FBI release any information they have on this investigation that included Tom Homan. There's been reporting, including at our network, that he was on video taking $50,000 in cash. So Democrats are urging the federal government now to give them any information, whether it's videos or documents or anything that might show what the investigation and Tom Homan found. The big question here is whether or not Senate Democrats will be able to actually urge and actually demand those documents to be released to them, because they have limited power, because, of course, Democrats are right now in the minority in the Senate and the House. Of course, this is coming from the Senate, but I know House Democrats are also interested in this. But again, because they have very limited power, Republicans really control not just, of course, Congress, but also the White House, the FBI, and the DOJ. So it's not clear that Attorney General Pam Bondi is going to be willing to play ball with them in any way. Savannah.
Yamiche, thank you so much for your reporting this morning. Well, next Wednesday, October 1st, is the deadline for a government shutdown. And lawmakers are not any closer to reaching a federal funding deal. In fact, Congress hasn't even been in session. Well, as NBC News Chief Capitol Hill correspondent Ryan Nobles explains, Democrats are standing firm and so far against this pressure from President Trump to not pass this budget, and even the threat of potential mass layoffs not changing that.
Days from a partial federal government shutdown, new pressure from the Trump administration. If Congress does not extend government funding, millions of federal workers could lose their jobs. OMB Director Russ Vought suggesting agencies target employees in programs that are, quote, not consistent with the president's priorities. House Republicans passed a spending bill that would keep the government open, but they need Democratic votes for it to pass the Senate. President Trump saying Democrats are making unreasonable demands.
Well, this is all caused by the Democrats. They want to give money away to illegals. They want to give them massive federal money. And we don't want to do that.
And accusing Democrats of hypocrisy. In a similar situation 6 months ago, Democrats supported a spending bill to keep the government open.
In a shutdown, American families would be hurt in ways they almost have never been.
But Democrats blasting President Trump for canceling a meeting with Democratic leaders.
Why'd you back out of the meeting, bro? Why? I don't understand.
A shutdown could lead to millions of federal workers not getting paid, in addition to those potential mass firings.
What would you say to federal workers that are just worried about losing their jobs?
We will continue to push back against any effort to undermine federal civil service protections that exist in the United States of America. As a negotiating tactic, our response to Russ' vote is simple: get lost.
Our thanks to Ryan Nobles for that report. There are no plans at this time for for each side to meet. Well, President Trump has signed an executive order that paves the way for TikTok to stay alive here in the U.S. This order facilitates the sale of the popular social media app from this Chinese-based company ByteDance to a group of American investors. We're still waiting on the details of exactly which investors. But once the deal is implemented, TikTok's U.S. operations will be run by this new joint venture company. The president says he spoke with the president of China prior to signing that executive order.
I had a very good talk with President Xi. A lot of respect for him. Hopefully he has a lot of respect for me, too. And we talked about TikTok and other things, but we talked about TikTok, and he gave us the go-ahead. You know, it's run by American investors and American companies, great ones, great investors, the biggest. You don't get bigger, I don't imagine.
Well, this deal will comply with a law passed last year. It sought to ban TikTok if it wasn't sold to U.S.-based owners. Vice President Vance says this transaction will value the business at $14 billion, calling it good for investors. That was certainly less than we were anticipating, so that seems to be true. Well, in what appears to be an abrupt move, Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth is summoning the U.S. military's top officers, hundreds of admirals and generals, to Northern Virginia next week for a rare meeting. The meeting is set to take place at Marine Corps Base Quantico, just outside of Washington. A Pentagon spokesperson said a meeting will take place, but did not elaborate on the specifics. NBC News national security reporter Gordon Lubbold joins us now with more on this. Gordon, good morning. Thank you so much for joining us. I mean, this certainly raised eyebrows yesterday. The Washington Post reported that this just happened yesterday. He ordered these senior officers in on short notice for this gathering. What do we know right now about this planned meeting, and how rare is something like this?
Well, first of all, it's very rare. Secretaries of Defense often call top officers to the Pentagon. It's usually a very planned meeting. The topics are very clear. What's notable about this one is the sheer number of officers, potentially as many as 800. You have 1-star generals and admirals all the way up to 3 and 4 stars. And the idea of bringing all of them in, again, on short notice, with no reason given for what the meeting's about is, it's extremely rare. I've covered the Pentagon for a long time. We've never seen this.
Are there concerns over how this meeting could impact the armed forces' readiness, like them all being at this meeting?
Yeah, for sure. This is, again, the sheer number of these officers who are at command posts all around the world. Mm-hmm. And so pulling them, just logistically pulling them all in on short notice, getting them here on aircraft, whether it be military aircraft or just commercial flights or whatever, and pulling them from their day jobs, as it were, and then putting them all in one central location does raise a lot of questions about the ability of the military to provide security for that spot, but also pulling them out of their jobs. And, if you're an adversary, maybe this is a good time to take advantage of it. It's just an unprecedented number of officers that are being pulled in. The meeting may become fairly mundane, but the lack of information for those officers and their aides and their staffs or whatever is kind of what's so remarkable here.
Gordon, what's the president said about this?
The president was asked about it in the Oval Office yesterday. I think he kind of shrugged it off. It's not totally clear that he understood the question, because his answer, said it's great to be friendly with the officers and generals coming in. It wasn't very clear that he responded to the answer specifically, to the question specifically. But I think the White House, to the extent that they understand what this is all about, will be fine with it. I think the devil will be in the details when over the next several days the Pentagon plans to bring these people in. Once they get into the heavy logistics and the security issues, then there may be more questions.
All right, Gordon, thank you so much. Well, here in New York, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu is set to speak at the United Nations General Assembly later this morning after a chorus of condemnation from the international body over the war in Gaza. In a remote speech yesterday, Palestinian President Mahmoud Abbas pledged to work with President Trump and others on a peace plan for Gaza, vowing Hamas, quote, will have no role in governance of the enclave. And President Trump is making promises of his own on the occupied West Bank. Listen.
I will not allow Israel to annex the West Bank. There's been enough. It's time to stop now.
NBC News International correspondent Matt Bradley is in Tel Aviv with more on this. Matt, good morning. So, Prime Minister, of course, facing pressure at home, but clearly from abroad. You've reported and really kind of helped us understand a little bit more about what is happening at home in terms of the pressure he's facing. What can we expect when we hear from him today? Do people expect that he's going to reaffirm this commitment to no matter how it impacts Palestinians?
Yeah, I mean, I expect that for an Israeli audience, this is going to be Benjamin Netanyahu's greatest hits. We're not going to hear, especially among the public here in Israel, anything that we haven't heard before, kind of like what we heard from Trump just a couple of days ago, speaking to the United Nations. You know, I think that, as you said, I think he's going to reaffirm his commitment to destroying Hamas. That's going to be a big issue. He's also going to be condemning, in no uncertain terms, I'm certain, those nations that decided to basically recognize a Palestinian state. That has been a big cause of consternation here among Israeli officialdom, and certainly the Prime Minister is going to be carrying that message abroad on this huge international stage. From what I understand from talking to people in the Prime Minister's office is that while maybe that people around Netanyahu are going to want this speech to be a bit more conciliatory, a bit more reaching out to the many, many dissenters and critics throughout the world of Israeli policy in the Gaza Strip. This person that I spoke to said that it's likely that this speech is also going to be incredibly defiant.
Let's get you a check of your weather now. There's a lot going on while you were sleeping. Tropical storm Umberto actually became a hurricane. Let's check in with our Angie Lastman. She is here in studio tracking the latest in the tropics for us. Hey, Angie, good morning.
Hi, Savannah. Good morning. You've got that right. A lot going on with the tropics. And as you mentioned, we have a newly formed hurricane. That means that 3 for 3 we've gone for systems that developed during this hurricane season and became a hurricane. So Humberto is now 75 miles per hour, northwest winds at 3 miles per hour, just crawling along. Put a pin in that system for a second and look to tropical disturbance 94L. 90% chance of that developing over the next 7 days, but likely going to happen much sooner than that. You can see it is producing still some showers, some thunderstorms, some gusty winds over parts of the Caribbean. Yesterday it was Puerto Rico. Today, the island of Hispaniola, as well as Turks and Caicos. So we're going to be keeping a close eye on that. When we go to Humberto, though, notice that we are likely looking at continued intensification with this system. So Cat 4 is on the table here as we get into Monday. It does look to take a northerly turn, but the good news is right now is we're not looking at any impacts from this system for the United States. And even Bermuda, it'll pass well to the west, likely of it. There's still a bit of a chance that it could take a little bit of an easterly turn there, but even still, it looks like those impacts will be indirect. Different story with 94L, which is expected to become a depression or a storm by late tonight or potentially into the weekend. Now, exactly where that develops, that is the million-dollar question at this point. You can see the development zone is wide-reaching, but it'll likely be near the Bahamas, again, in that short time frame. The models, they're coming into better agreement. So you can kind of see some of the spaghetti plots there. Better agreement that the Carolinas, maybe late Monday into early Tuesday, could see impacts from this. Some models, though, notice, still take it out for that right turn before it hits the coast. This is extremely uncertain still, but we're starting to get a better idea of it. Now, let's kind of put the American model and the European model side by side, and you can see the differences. European model, a little slower, kind of stalls out that system offshore by the time we get to Tuesday. The American model takes it on land, of course, into the Carolinas late Monday night. We're also going to see it kind of interacting with a ridge of high pressure well to the north, and that means that that stall is going to matter with exactly where that happens and when that happens because of rainfall. So we could potentially be looking at a high rainfall event. Now, if the system is sitting offshore, that means that most of the heavy rain will be offshore as well. That doesn't mean we're unscathed or we don't have any impacts in the Carolinas, but it's a whole lot different if the center of that system maintains its strength and is sitting over the Carolinas for a prolonged period for inland flooding. So we'll watch for that concern here over the next couple of days. Again, the timing looks to be Monday into Tuesday, but we still really, Savannah, don't know if it's going to take this exact path. We still have the influence from Umberto that could potentially pull it farther to the right, although the models, again, are starting to come into better agreement. The really important thing we're waiting for now now is exactly where that center forms, because that is how we get the initial conditions, and that's what you put into the model to kind of give you, to spit out exactly the best solutions that you can have. If you don't know where you're starting, then it's harder to get an accurate kind of forecast down the line. So that's going to be a telltale sign of exactly what happens over the next couple of days. But if you live on the southeast coast, now is the time that you want to start paying attention for sure.
Great information for people that live in that area. Pay attention. Spaghetti plots, like that one.
You like that
Learning
one?
new words. Check out Angie's Instagram, by the way. She's explaining all these questions I ask her in the morning. I love it.
You're my muse.
Thank you, Angie. We'll see you in a little bit.
We thank you for watching, and remember, stay updated on breaking news and top stories on the NBC News app or watch live on our YouTube channel.